Well, greetings all. It's been my habit over the last few episodes of the podcast to begin with a question, and I want to do the same with this episode today. The question is essentially this: do you relate to the feeling of a kind of feeling of overwhelm and even a feeling occasionally of being besieged by the complexity in the world, the political complexity, the complexity around all the environmental challenges that are coming at us, the social challenges? Do you ever feel that sense of overwhelm, even being besieged? Well, if you do relate to that, the premise of today's podcast, today's episode, is that there are muscles that we can actually begin to work out, in essence, using poetry in a very specific way to help us step into very complex situations and begin to make meaning in those situations. It's like that we're able to deal with paradox and conundrum and contradictions in a way, with facilities that we may not normally have, and that's exactly what makes us feel so overwhelmed. This feeling that we can't seem to make the meaning that we long for, and so that's essentially it. And not only that we can make meaning using poetry as a way to practice, to work out these muscles, these meaning making muscles, but that we can also have a little joy and feel a little inspiration at the same time. Well, that's my way of inviting you to this edition of Poetry, Gossip, and the Pursuit of Pleasure with Dale Byron. Well, that's me, of course. And in this podcast, as we say, we explore the creative and practical ways that poetry can help us in our everyday lives, finding little pockets of joy, sanity, and connectedness. So this week's episode is entitled, as you've probably already seen, Meaning Making, Joy, and You. And I want us to jump right into the first poem that I've chosen for us. Larry Levis, who is a very, very talented poet, and he lived from 1946 to 1996, so his life was cut short. But he taught poetry, was very skilled. And here's a poem he wrote called In a Country. In a Country by Larry Levis. So it goes like this. My love and I are inventing a country which we can already see taking shape, as if wheels were passing through yellow mud. But there is a problem. If we put a river in the country, it will thaw and begin flooding. If we put the river on the border, there will be trouble. If we forget about the river, there will be no way out. There is already a sky over that country waiting for clouds or smoke. Birds have flown into it too. Each evening, more trees fill with their eyes, and what they see, we can never erase. One day, it was snowing heavily, and again, we were lying in bed watching our country. We could make out the wide river for the first time, blue and moving. We seemed to be getting closer. We saw our wheel tracks leading into it and curving out of sight behind us. It looked like the land we had left, some smoke in the distance, but I wasn't sure. It looked like the land we had left, some smoke in the distance, but I wasn't sure. There were birds calling. The creaking of our wheels. And as we entered that country, it felt as if someone was touching our bare shoulders lightly for the last time. One day it was snowing heavily, And again, we were lying in bed watching our country. We could make out the wide river for the first time, blue and moving. We seemed to be getting closer. We saw our wheel tracks leading into it and curving out of sight behind us. It looked like the land we had left. It looked like the land we had left. Some smoke in the distance, but I wasn't sure. There were birds calling, the creaking of our wheels, and as we entered that country, it felt as if someone was touching our bare shoulders lightly, lightly for the last time. Now, you may notice that when you step inside that poem, that you are moved from image to image in ways that at first may at least give us a little bit of trouble because we're like, well, part of the strategic mind wants to know, where are we? What's happening? And yet our heart works, I think. And you tell me your experience, or think about your experience, feel your experience, that those images actually step in and assist the strategic mind, which maybe has questions, but the heart just says, ah, ah, especially with those last lines. And as we entered that country, it felt as if someone was touching our bare shoulders lightly for the last time. Now, if you ask me, what does that poem mean? What does it mean in the way of yes or no or specifics and that kind of thing? I would say I'm not sure. But there's a feeling, there's a felt sense of that poem. And the poem has some loneliness in it. The poem has some joy in it. The poem has some ways of taking me on into a trip, into a world that I had not been into before, and letting me experience that world. A complex world for sure, with things, joy and sadness, and things that normally we don't think about, at least strategically. We don't think that those things go together. And yet life is constantly putting those things together. Have you noticed? Now, I was looking at a Joy Harjo quote. She said, without poetry, we lose our way. Without poetry, we lose our way. And then I thought, but maybe we do need to lose our way. Maybe sometimes we do need to lose our way, especially if there is a bigger, wiser version of ourselves waiting to find a new way. And I think with so many of these challenges that we're faced with, political and ecological in particular, particularly ecological, which obviously relates to politics, that we have to find meaning in new ways, step into meaning in new ways. So let's keep cooking. Remember our theme. We're trying to practice our meaning-making muscles. And in doing so, sometimes we're going to duck below the strategic mind and do some things that the strategic mind says, wait a minute, what does this mean? But we're looking for deeper meaning. I think that's what we're looking for. The Forgotten Dialect of the Heart by Jack Gilbert. Now, Jack Gilbert returns to us. I've had several poems over the last few episodes. This is a different one, of course. It's called The Forgotten Dialect of the Heart. Now, even the title begins to infer that there's a dialect of the heart. In our culture, we're particularly, all of us, I think, imbued with this sense of the intellect. And it's not wrong or bad. We need ideas. We need the intellect. We need strategies. But we also need the heart. We also need to be able to practice the heart muscles. We need to be able to invoke the heart, especially in these difficult predicaments. They're not even problems. They're deeper than problems. They're predicaments, political, ecological, social, that we are now running directly into. The Forgotten Dialect of the Heart by Jack Gilbert. How astonishing it is that language can almost mean, and frightening that it does not quite. Okay, let me say that first line again. How astonishing is it I'm sorry, how astonishing it is that language can almost mean, and frightening that it does not quite. Love we say, God we say, Rome and Machiko we write, and the words get it all wrong. We say bread, and it means according to which nation. Now you're beginning to kind of step into this. He's talking about the limits of language, and yet poetry is all about pushing the limits of language further and further. But he's saying, isn't it wild how language can almost get us to those nuances of meaning and yet not quite? And of course, it's paradoxical because he's trying and he's doing everything possible to get us to those new levels, those new nuances of meaning. So the poem goes on. We say bread, and it means according to which nation? French has no word for home, and we have no word for strict pleasure. A people in northern India is dying out because their ancient tongue has no words for endearment. I dream of lost vocabularies that might express some of what we no longer can. Maybe the Etruscan text would finally explain why the couples on their tombs are smiling. And maybe not when the thousands of mysterious Sumerian tablets were translated. They seem to be business records. But what if they are poems or psalms? My joy is the same as 12 Ethiopian goats standing silent in the morning light. O Lord, thou art slabs of salt and ingots of copper, as grand as ripe barley, lithe under the wind's labor. Her breasts are 6 white oxens loaded with bolts of long fibered Egyptian cotton. My love is 100 pitchers of honey. Oh, what an image. My love is 100 pitchers of honey. Shiploads of thuya are what my body wants to say to your body. Giraffes are this desire in the dark. Perhaps the spiral Minoan script is not language, but a map. What we feel most has no name but amber, archers, cinnamon, horses, and birds. What we feel most has no name. Perhaps what we feel most has no name but amber, archers, cinnamon, horses, and birds. How amazing we begin to have this dialect of the heart, which is really images. And we begin to think that as we step into the environmental predicaments that we have, the political predicaments, that maybe what we need are feelings, are images, rather than this kind of yes, no, ones and zeros kind of world that we've built for ourselves. And this seems to be getting us into some deep trouble. I think a poem like this, speaking of that, unleashes our nonlinear, paradox eating, dilemma managing superpowers. And yes, we have them if we practice those muscles. The world is not digital. It is not yes and no. It flows and flows and flows. Have you noticed the world flows? It's not made of squares. It's not made of straight lines. It's circles. It's curves. It's actually curves more than anything else. This kind of poem, I think, helps us gather our strategic intellectual powers and our intuitive imaginative powers as well, and bring them together and transcend one simply without the other, but to bring head and heart together to help us practice the art of making meaning and making new meaning that we oh so desperately need, so that we're able to walk inside this poem and others, and that there's a kind of delicious democratic feeling inside because the poem needs us. We need the poem. We come in and together we make meaning. We need the poem, and the poem needs us. So let's keep on cooking. Now we're going to step into a poem by Wallace Stevens. A lot of people feel like Wallace Stevens is a little bit hard to get as a poet, but I'm going to jump right in with a very short poem he did. And let's see how you relate to this. Let's see if it keeps this theme that we're talking about being able to work our meaning muscles to bring the heart and the head together in a new, powerful way. Okay. This poem is called Of Mere Being by Wallace Stevens. And look for the images in this poem, would be my one little tip as we step into it. Of mere being. The palm at the end of the mind. What an image. The palm at the end of the mind, beyond the last thought, rises in the bronze decor. A gold feathered bird sings in the palm, without human meaning, without human feeling, a foreign song. You know then that it is not the reason. You know then that it is not the reason that makes us happy or unhappy. The bird sings, its feathers shine, the palm stands on the edge of space. The wind moves slowly in the branches. The birds' fire fangled feathers dangle down. What an image. What an image. Now, what's wild? Let me just step out of this for a second. Wallace Stevens was a poet who was also an insurance executive. And he incredible poet, Pulitzer Prize winning poet. And he wrote all his life and kept that job as an insurance executive. And many people in the insurance company, by the way, did not know that he wrote poetry. It's amazing. I mean, just blows my mind away. And he walked to work every day. Lived in Connecticut, as I recall, where the insurance company was. The palm at the end of the mind, he starts the poem, the palm at the end of the mind, beyond the last thought, rises in the bronze decor. A gold feathered bird sings in the palm without human meaning, without human feeling, a foreign song. You know then that it is not the reason that makes us happy or unhappy. How about that? How about that? It is not the reason. We could say it is not reason that makes us happy or unhappy. And then he goes on to talk about the heart, the emotions. The bird sings, its feathers shine. The palm stands on the edge of space. The wind moves slowly, slowly in the branches. The bird's fire fangled feathers dangle down. Oh, what an image. Now, this was a heady, intellectual business person who wrote this. And I think Wallace Stevens was transcending the intellect and moving the intellect together with the heart. Sometimes we have to let these poems fly under the radar screen of our intellect because we will push it aside until it gets in there and gets in the heart, and then we're done. We're had. But that is the kind of had that we want, because it helps us make meaning. It helps us stretch our capacity. And, I think it helps us deal with the wild complexities that we're going to have to deal with when it comes to climate, the climate predicament, our political predicament, our cultural wars that we're involved in. These things are going to require that we transcend just the intellect and we bring the heart along. Not alone, we need both, but we need both together. Okay, now, Larry Levis is so amazing, a poet, and I haven't brought poems by him, I don't believe, to this podcast yet. So I picked two today. And I hope you enjoy this second Larry Levis poem as well. It's called The Poem You Asked For. The Poem You Asked For by Larry Levis. Now remember, just step into this poem and let it, let the poem take you wherever it takes you. And maybe your intellect is going to say, wait, 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 and just try to put the brakes on. And then your heart will just say, okay, well, let's just go with it. Let's just go with it. And somehow in that, in that tension, you will find something new. Um, yeah, let's try it out. The Poem You Asked For by Larry Levis. My poem would eat nothing. My poem would eat nothing. I tried giving it water, but it said no. Worrying me day after day, I held it up to the light, turning it over, but it only pressed its lips more tightly together. It grew sullen like a toad through with being teased. I offered it money. Through with being teased, I offered it money. My clothes, my car with a full tank, but the poem stared at the floor. Finally, I cupped it. I cupped it in my hands and carried it gently out into the soft air, into the evening traffic, wondering how to end things between us. For now, it had begun breathing. For now, it had begun breathing, putting on more and more rings of flesh. And the poem demanded the food. It drank all the water, beat me and took my money, tore the faded clothes off my back, said shit, and walked slowly away, slicking its hair down, said it was going over to your place. Doesn't that poem take us for quite a ride? The poem you asked for. So, the poem you asked for, it takes us for a ride. A little bit of humor in there, but there's also, it mixes humor with pathos. It mixes difficulty with a little bit of, again, a little bit of humor. And just in the sense of bringing this poem alive, literally, metaphorically, all of the above. My poem would eat nothing. That's how he started it. My poem would eat nothing. I tried giving it water, but it said no. Worrying me day after day, I held it up to the light, turning it over, but it only pressed its lips more tightly together. It grew sullen like a toad. Through with being teased, I offered it money, my clothes, my car with a full tank, but the poem stared at the floor. See, the poem ain't buying it. The poem ain't going for it. So the protagonist says, finally, I cupped it in my hands. I cupped it in my hands and carried it gently out into the soft air, into the evening traffic, wondering how to end things between us. For now it had begun breathing. It had begun breathing, putting on more and more hard rings of flesh. And the poem demanded the food. It drank up all the water, beat me and took my clothes, tore the faded clothes off my back, said shit, and walked slowly away, slicking its hair down, said it was going over to your place. Sometimes those poems that bring us this hit of surprise. I don't know about you, but when I got to that, I've known this poem for some number of years, but every time I read it, it gives me this kind of feeling like I didn't know quite where I was in the poem, but I kept following it because I wanted to follow it, and there were images and there was difficulty and there's some violence in there. The poem got violent. Who ever heard of that? Well, this poem, this protagonist, this poet. So it shifts things around. pulls the rug out from under our normal selves. You know, there's that old expression, I've known you so long, I have no idea who you are. Well, that actually works, I think, with us. We can know who we are so strongly. We can know who we are for so long that we have no idea who we are actually. We can do that with other people, begin to take them for granted, like we know them and we don't have to ask them questions. And we can do that with ourselves, which is even more tragic in some ways. More tragic. Okay, so let's let ourselves get lost and found as needed. Certain poems I wrote can help us relax our strategic self long enough to feel and think deeply with our hearts as well as our heads. We need both. We need both if we're going to make meaning that is going to meet the complexity of this world, the paradoxes, the conundrums, the contradictions, the tensions in this world. We are going to need all of us, our whole selves, if we're going to do that with any skillfulness. Okay, so I've got just one more poem and then a quote, which is rather poetic, by the Black Elk. You're going to want to stick around for that. But first, a delicious poem by the poet William Stafford. And you've heard me do William Stafford poems on this podcast before because he is one of my most incredible mentor poets from afar. Never met him in person. He was already past this particular life by the time I fell in love with his poems. Okay. He called this poem A Course in Creative Writing. See what happens to you when you step inside. Remember the muscles that we're working. Just let yourself, go with it. That's my request. A Course in Creative Writing. They want a wilderness with a map. They want a wilderness with a map. But how about errors that give a new start? Or leaves that are edging into the light? Or the many places a road can't find? You see how the poet is already, let's stop there for a second. He's speaking for mystery. He's speaking for just stepping into the process, letting ourselves take one step at a time, and we can begin to discover things that we would have never discovered had we not begun. And sometimes on the get-go, we're like discouraged because we go, how are we ever going to get there? And the poet is saying, the protagonist in this poem is saying, hey, how about just taking the creative leap? And aren't we going to need to do that to make meaning out of things that are actually overwhelming us? And as we said at the first of this episode, maybe even besieging us with their complexity. Okay. They want a wilderness with a map. First stanza again. But how about errors that give a new start? Or leaves that are edging into the light? Or the many places a road can't find? Maybe there's a land where you have to sing to explain anything. You blow a little whistle just right, and the next tree you meet is itself. And many a tree is not there yet. Things come toward you when you walk. You go along singing a song that says where you are going because it's own, because you start. You blow a little whistle and a world begins under the map. Now, I don't know about you, but one of the things that does for me is it says maps, right? We have a map for the world. We have a map right now, ecological map that says we can grow infinitely on a finite planet. And there are many of us that are beginning to say, that is insane. That is insane. You can't grow infinitely on a finite planet. And yet we have a map that says that. We have an economic map. We have a belief map that says that. And so maybe what Stafford is saying, I think he is saying it, is that there's a world can begin under the map, which could be a new map, a new truer map, a new map that's more effective. Now, I believe again that the intellect is wonderful with its ideas and strategies and plans and such. However, in order to be fully alive and to be effective, That's an important part. We need the head and heart pulling the same wagon, to use that metaphor, because I think that there has been a coup of the intellect. The coup has, secured the palace and said, heart need not apply, emotions need not apply. This is all about reason, all about ones and zeros, all about yeses and nos. And now we are beginning to discover that if we only have the intellect, no heart, that we are in big trouble. We are in big trouble. And I think we are in big trouble because it is the heart that understands the curves, the flows of the world. And we need that as well. Okay, we're almost through today, almost done with this episode. I wanted to end with a piece by Black Elk, the indigenous, amazing leader that I'm sure many, if you're listening to this, many of you know about Black Elk. This was something that he said, and I believe the note I made is holding and healing our inner contradictions and paradoxes, we begin to have a vision that integrates heart, head, and soul. And I think that Black Elk, the great leader, Oglala Sioux leader, I think that in this quote that I'm going to say, which is quite poetic, it's like a poem in and of itself, I think it shows a heart and a head and a soul that are integrated. It shows someone who is very skilled at meaning making, the very skill that we need in our lives today. It's called The True Peace by Black Elk. The True Peace. The first piece, which is the most important, is that which comes within the souls of people when they realize their relationship, their oneness with the universe and all its powers. And when they realize that at the center of the universe dwells the Great Spirit, and that this center is really everywhere. It is within each of us. This is the real peace. This is the real peace. And the others are but reflections of this. The second peace is that which is made between two individuals. And the third is that which is made between two nations. But above all, you should understand that there can never be peace between nations until there is known that true peace, which, as I have often said, is within the souls of men. Within the souls of men. Black Elk. I feel like poetry helps us exercise our meaning making muscles. This perspective, this map that Black Elk is using to perceive the universe, to perceive our lives, to perceive how peace happens, that peace is an inside job, here first, then with another person, then between nations. That may well be the most foundational, if we go way back upriver to where cause is cause, that may be the change, the shift that we are truly going to need to make if we are going to make peace, if we're going to become a good animal, if we're going to have an ecology that we support and an ecology that supports us, an ecology that we feel fully integrated in, which seems to be what every great wisdom system, what every great religion in the world says the same thing that Black Elk is saying, that we are one, that we are one. And Again, poetry helps us exercise our meaning-making muscles, healing our inner contradictions and paradoxes so that we can begin to have a vision that integrates the head, the heart, and the soul, the wholeness of ourselves. Well, that's going to do it. That's a wrap. I want to thank each and every one of you for your listening ear, and for those of you who watch this podcast on YouTube, for your eyes and your listening ear. Thank you very much. Pass it along to others if you think others would enjoy it, and leave a comment. I would love it if you left a comment. If you happen to be watching this on YouTube, and if you want to leave a comment on which of these poems was the most interesting to you, or the most profound, or allowed you to practice your meaning-making muscles, and that'd be great. That'd be great. It was always, any of those comments will help all of us. Okay, thanks again for your listening ear and your watching eyes if you're on YouTube. And until next time and next poems, as I always say, take good care of yourself.